On December 1st, 1948, beachgoers in Adelaide, Australia made a gruesome discovery. Halfway along the Somerton coastline, nestled between a clump of seaweed and a broken bottle, they found the body of an unidentified man. He was well dressed in a dark suit and a crisp white shirt. His collar unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up. Handsomeness even in death. His shoes were polished, his hair slicked back. But he had no ID and no obvious cause of death. And so began one of Australia's most enduring mysteries, the identity and strange circumstances of the so-called Somerton Man. As the decades passed without answers, more bizarre details emerged. Months after the beach discovery, investigators searching the dead man's pockets found a scrap of paper with the cryptic Persian phrase, Tamám Shud, meaning, "It is finished." The tantalizing message turned out to be torn from the final page of a 19th century copy of Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat, a collection of poems considered one of the greatest works of Persian literature. The book was eventually traced to an Adelaide bookshop. But when the store owner was interviewed by the press, he claimed not to remember selling the missing page or ever having stocked copies of the Rubaiyat. Then there was the cipher. It was discovered hidden in the back cover of the same book, a string of over 60 letters with no clear pattern or alphabet. This perplexing message, which has never been deciphered, only added to the enigma of the Somerton Man, who was still unidentified after all those years. And now it's time for us to embark on our own investigation into the case of Tamám Shud. As always, this is going to be a tough nut to crack, but fear not, intrepid viewers, for we have brought along our special tools to help us get to the bottom of this mystery. Let's begin. Clothing and belongings. We'll start with the basics. Who was this man, and how did he die? Well, unfortunately, these are the questions that stumped investigators for all those years. And it's hard to answer them even today, given that the Somerton Man was never identified, though modern-day sleuths have put forward plenty of intriguing theories. The clothing he was wearing certainly wasn't typical for a beachside stroll. So why would someone dress like that, and then go for a walk by the water and fall into the sea, presumably fully clothed? Suicide seems unlikely, especially given that there were no signs of struggle and no indication of mental illness. And if he fell into the water accidentally, wouldn't his clothes have been a lot less rumpled? One explanation offered by the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine is that the body had been in the water long enough for most of the air to have been expelled from the clothes, making them look far less waterlogged than they actually were. But surely others would have found it strange to see a man walking along the beach fully suited and booted. And yet, no one came forward to identify him. There's something else that makes the Somerton case especially odd, and it's a detail that takes us right back to the beach. See, when authorities arrived at the scene, they noted that the dead man was smoking a half-smoked cigarette. Now this is pretty strange because someone who died by drowning typically doesn't have a lit cigarette in their hand, nor do we expect a corpse to smoke cigarettes. Either the man was still alive when someone left the body on the beach, or whoever brought the body there recently lit the cigarette and put it in the dead man's hand. But either way, there's a much bigger question. Why would anyone dress up a dead body and leave it on a busy public beach? The whole thing is utterly bizarre. But the real head-scratcher comes next. Take a close look at the photograph of the Somerton Man's clothes. You'll notice something odd about every garment. Every label has been painstakingly removed. What kind of lengths would someone have to go to ensure that no one could know what brand of suit he was wearing? Was it to avoid any association with a particular political party or social group? Was the clothing simply too expensive or too revealing for conservative Adelaide? Or was it something else entirely? Tamám Shud. One of the biggest breakthroughs in the Somerton Man case came almost 5 months after his body was found, when investigators discovered that cryptic scrap of paper. It read, Tamám Shud, meaning, "It is finished," or "It has come to an end." And the first part of that statement is true, at least it was. That was the last page of a copy of Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat. But where did it come from, and why was it left on the beach? One tantalizing theory is that the poem's famous final line, "This too shall pass," resonated with the dead man. He took this to mean that life itself is temporary, everything is fleeting, and nothing lasts forever. Perhaps he was so overcome by the sentiment that he walked down to the beach and sat on the sand until the tide came in and drowned him, bringing his life to an end. But that's just one possible interpretation. To trace the provenance of the torn Rubaiyat, we reached out to Andrew Taylor, a rare book specialist based in Perth, Australia. Mr. Taylor tells us that finding a missing page can be quite challenging, since many books are printed with different pagination, meaning that not every book will have a page numbered 173. However, he explains that there are usually some clues. For example, page numbers in books are often staggered. So if the first page of a sequence is missing, you can often assume that the second page would have been number 175. In the case of the Rubaiyat, Mr. Taylor says that one would need to examine the binding to see if there were any holes that might indicate where the missing page belonged, allowing for a better estimate of the book's pagination. Cipher. When police examined the pages inside the Rubaiyat, they also discovered something truly peculiar. Hidden between the covers was an indecipherable cipher, a string of over 60 letters that baffled investigators. Today, more than 70 years later, it continues to baffle cryptographers. Dr. Bill von der Linden, president of the non-profit organization dedicated to solving the case, the Cipher Foundation, tells us that the team has been working hard to decode the message. Dr. von der Linden notes that their work is especially challenging because they don't know what alphabet the cipher uses. And of course, knowing that the message is almost certainly linked to the mysterious Somerton Man provides a rather large clue. The Cipher Foundation has been running various tests to try and find a match with Cold War-era ciphers. At this point, they have narrowed down the possibilities to 3 main ones, 2 of which date to World War II and 1 to the Cold War period. But none of them has produced a definitive result yet. We asked Dr. Linden whether there is anything that the general public can do to help solve the cipher. Absolutely, he said. Dissemination of the cipher helps keep attention on the problem. And perhaps the publicity will inspire someone somewhere to make the breakthrough. If you think you might be that person, you can download the full cipher from the Foundation's website, DNA Insights. Finally, let's turn our attention to another major development in the case, the 2025 DNA study published in Smithsonian Magazine. According to the article, new DNA analysis suggests that the Somerton Man may be Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. Webb disappeared in 1946 while visiting Adelaide, which was a few years before his body washed up on Somerton Beach. However, despite this high-profile identification, South Australia police say they have not confirmed it. Given that the original evidence was lost decades ago, the only DNA sample available to researchers came from a cigarette butt recovered from the dead man's pocket. Unfortunately, such samples aren't ideal since they contain tobacco DNA that can overwhelm the genetic material of the person who smoked the cigarette. Nonetheless, the test yielded a partial mitochondrial DNA profile which matched that of one of Webb's relatives. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down maternally, so this suggests that the 2 individuals share a common ancestor. But it's important to note that this doesn't necessarily mean they are related. Ultimately, without further evidence, we cannot conclude that the so-called Somerton Man was indeed Charles Webb. Nevertheless, this is one of the strongest leads in the case, which brings us back to that curious question. Was this really the case of a man who walked to his death while reading poetry, pondering the ephemeral nature of human existence? We may never know the truth. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And if the phantom of the Somerton Man still haunts your curiosity, smash that like, subscribe, and ring the bell on Midnight Verdict, because some mysteries demand reckoning. Thanks for watching.